Welcome to this called September 19th, 2019 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. I now ask Dr. Townsend Smith to call the roll to determine that we have a quorum of the board participating. And a note to all listening that a quorum is 7 members. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Here.
Dr. Oxendine?
Present.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Here.
Mr. Keenan?
Here.
Ms. White?
Here.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Here.
Chair Davis?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Townsend Smith. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record, and if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you've seen the agenda for this September 19, 2019 meeting. Had the opportunity to review it, ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda, and if not, I request a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved. This is Olivia Oxendine offering that motion.
And motion by Dr. Oxendine. Is there a second?
I second. This is Ms. Kamnitz.
Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Thank you. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote for approval of the agenda?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Motion carries. We now have an agenda. Thank you. I note for the record that the board will take a roll call vote on any items requiring action on the agenda. And we'll now proceed directly to our committee meetings, and we'll begin with the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chairman Davis. My name is Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the ES&P subcommittee of the State Board of Education. And joining me in that responsibility is Sammy White. We are here today largely as a follow-up from the September State Board meeting. And board members, if you will look at the summary, executive summary item, I'm going to draw your attention to, oh, by the way, this is an action on first reading, but board members, I would like to draw your attention to, it's somewhere in the middle of the executive summary page, and it really it encapsulates and summarizes
joined the conference.
The essence or the thumbnail of why we are here today to act on this particular rules item. This is pursuant to General Statute 115C269, and it is .45C1, and it is kind of, I suppose, the title or the subtitle is a small group exception. Represents a lot of work that Pepsi has done to come up with 13 rules and to also prepare a report that will go over to the General Assembly very soon. Our obligation and responsibility today, and we're fulfilling that, is to act on these 13 rules along with any policy changes to TCED 008 and TCED 0013, and also included in that body of, or that recommendation, I should say, will also include the report that will go to the General Assembly. So we are meeting that deadline of October 1, and with our rulemaking responsibilities, and I'm going to call on Dr. Seiberg to go into a bit more detail on this item.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Good morning, everyone.
The recent passage of House Bill 107 back at the end of July addresses the accountability measures and sanctions for educator preparation programs. And last week I presented you some drafts of policies that were associated with that, as well as to make sure that everyone understands that in addition to this somewhat urgent response to meet this October 1 deadline for the small group exception and set some thresholds for sanctions, that also in 107 is it's written and sort of laid out that the Pepsi and with recommendations from Pepsi and the board around February of 2020, we are to also go back to the Joint Legislative Committee to present a weighted composite model with the idea that this is a starting point. What you're seeing here and what we're looking at today is a starting point, but the idea of a more fleshed out and more nuanced approach to accountability measures is expected later on in February. So this law, as I just mentioned, is required. There's some action to be required by this board before October 1 around the small group exception. And this is basically to say that in instances of very small educator preparation programs, a program that might only produce a couple of graduates, program completers in a couple of years' time, how are they going to still be held accountable, as well as to set some thresholds for when sanctions should be issued to EPPs when they're not meeting expectations on three measures that were outlined in 107. Those three measures are the student growth, which is examined using EVOS, teacher evaluations, and a recent graduate survey. So a survey of folks who have just completed a program and are within 1 year of that graduation. So at last week's board meeting, we presented adjustments to two policies that coincide with sort of fleshing out House Bill 107. And that's TCED 008, which is the sanctions side of things, and TCED 013, which is the accountability measures and reporting side of things associated with 107. But again, as I mentioned, that they weren't quite ready for your approval at that time because we still had to create rules. So since last week's meeting, we've worked with Eric and his colleagues and the board legal staff to develop the rules associated with these two policies. There are 13 of them, as Dr. Oxendine mentioned a minute ago. And then we also, since last week, had our regularly scheduled Pepsi meeting, and we were able to get formal recommendations to you all on the two policies, the various rules associated with them. And then additionally, yesterday, we were able to complete the development of the formal report that presents the small group exception rule to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, and that's the requirement that needs to be in place by October 1. So it's these three sets of materials that we're seeking approval from the board.
Thank you, Dr. Seidberg. Do I hear any questions or comments or concerns from my colleagues on the board?
I've got a question, Dr. Oxenden. It's Jay Big.
Sure, thank you. Definitely.
It's not a question about what we have here. It's just a question I would like to know the answer to at some point, which is given the action by the General Assembly eliminating the NC final exams, when you go to the student growth component, which is on, as I numbered these, page 6 of the attachment, what percentage of our teachers will now have a student growth component?
That's a great question. Let me hand this over to Dr. Tomerlin, who I think is on the line in a different space than I am, because he's closer to being able to respond to you about the details around EVOS and next steps.
Shifting seats.
Are you there, Dr. Tomerlin?
Yes, shifting seats. Give us 1 second.
Hi. So the question, let me make sure I understand the question is, what is the impact of Senate Bill 621 on our ability to monitor the effectiveness of EPPs in core subjects like social studies and some science?
No, I'm asking different. I'm just saying what percentage of our teachers will have student growth measure right now. I know we have to identify one somehow, some way, but right now, given the elimination of those final exams, what percentage of our teachers have any student data?
So that differs based on the school level you're talking about. So probably about 80% of our teachers in elementary will have a growth score. Probably about 40% in middle school, and then probably about 20% in high school.
So let me just flip that. And Dr. Oxendine, I'm suggesting that we might want to include this in the report to make sure the General Assembly is aware of this situation. If we have 20% of our, 20% of our elementary teachers, 60% of our middle school teachers, and 80% of our high school teachers with no growth data at this point.
Mr. Buxton, I'm sorry, I need to modify the high school because CTE will still have growth. So that would raise that probably to about 30-40% of the high school.
But whatever the situation, at present, you're really looking at, for lots of EPPs, a heavier reliance on the other two measures, the survey and the evaluation data. Because lots of their teachers are not going to have a growth measure.
That is accurate, and I think
I just think raising that issue in the report just as a point of information, and because this has changed given 621 since they passed 107. So I think it's important to have out in the public space this challenge to the accountability system they've legislated.
I think that is worthy of absolutely finding its way into the report to the General Assembly. And I could certainly see a role for Dr. Howard to be part of that collaboration to address it with, and probably with some nuance, nuance is never clear. That's an oxymoron in the report. So that's a point well taken, Mr. Buxton.
Dr. Oxendine, may I make a point of clarification that before I go back to my seat? 621 not only eliminates North Carolina final exams, but it also puts the agency, it requires the agency to develop an effectiveness model for those teachers for whom NCFEs provided effectiveness data.
All right, very good. So that's work coming forward, right?
That is correct.
But also give some thought, if you and Dr. Howard and others would give some thought to Mr. Buxton's recommendation to find a place in the report, wherever that's appropriate, to raise this flag.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's my only question.
Thank you very much. Other questions or comments? Dr. Seiberg, I have a question around the essence of this report to the General Assembly. I'm looking at attachment 7, and I'm wondering if you go to page 1 of 1, attachment 7, and it is, I'm going to just go to the lines 11 through 15. If an EPP has no subgroups that meet minimum sample size at the beginning of that sentence, lines 11, and then a line 15. It's just the completion of the sentence, actually. Does that body of information between lines 11 and 15, is that the essence of what this report should capture? Or report to the General Assembly. Does that get at the report, kind of the nutshell of the report?
Yes, Dr. Oxendine, that is the essence of the small group exception. So it's basically saying there that if a program, all programs are going to be monitored, and if a program does not meet the threshold over 3 years and across all the programs that they have in aggregate, then essentially what this measure is saying is that they will still be held to the same expectations and standards regardless of how small the program is. And that does mean that the program would be, if I had a program that was running and I only had 4 candidates that came out over 3 years time, I would still be held to the same standards and expectations as a program like UNC Charlotte that may have hundreds of candidates graduating in that time. If one of those candidates does not fare well, then that does mean, I'll be disproportionately affected by that because I have a smaller sample size to deal with. But this was the recommendation that came from Pepsi.
All right, very good. Then I have another question. This pertains to TCED 008, the sanctions. And I'm thinking, I read the draft very carefully. The table in the draft is very, very helpful because it really takes the verbiage and puts it into kind of a succinct table form. Talk to the board. Maybe other board members understand this, but I'm a little bit confused about cost related to an EPP that is in sanction mode. What kind of cost would an EPP incur?
Well, there is a in 599, which precedes this 107 that we're talking about today. 599 sort of lays out in their sanctions work, and this is specifically in 115C-269.45. It talks about in section E costs, that any cost associated with the sanctions under a previous subsection of this section shall be paid by the EPP. And so what you're seeing in the work that has gone on and transpired, to get where we're at today, one of the things that we noticed in the previous policy was when you achieve a revoked status, prior to what we've got in front of you today, what was in place was you were no longer allowed to have students, to recruit students into your program. And at the same time, the policy said that you have to demonstrate that your students are doing better in order for your program to get out of revoked status. Well, if you are not allowed to bring in students, then you have no chance of showing that you're getting better. So essentially, revocation means you're done at that point. And so what the thinking from Pepsi and the subgroups and the stakeholders that were all a part of these conversations was, let's see if we can put something together that still allows or accommodates an EPP to be able to demonstrate that they're turning their program around. And to that end, they are saying that that if you are revoked in revoked status, you can still continue to admit students into your program, but you must agree to pay for the North Carolina New Teacher Support Program, which is an identified thriving program for beginning teachers out in the field, so that each of your graduates has this support when they come out, that they have a better chance of being well supported and a better opportunity to be successful, given that you're currently under revoked status. So this was a way for allowing an EPP an opportunity to continue to to have students in their program be able to turn their numbers around and show that they are improving, and at the same time maintain a safety net so that the quality of the students and the education and support that they're getting is maintained. And to that end, that would be a cost that would be incurred by the EPP, which is outlined in 599, and that is a specific place where a cost would be incurred.
Okay. Now, I could ask many other questions associated related to that, but I won't, because I have a feeling that the answers to the questions will come at a time when all of the policies and procedures, not policies, but procedures are developed around payment and amount and those particulars. Is that correct?
Yeah, those more granular level details are not ironed out yet, but there is a standard fee associated with North Carolina new teacher support per candidate, and the details behind that would have to be worked out. Yes.
Another final question, and then we'll move on, or I will conclude the business of this committee. With respect to a sanction, an EPP in sanction status, does the sanction apply to all programs of study? For instance, if an EPP is in revocation, and I hope what I'm discussing is purely rhetorical and never happens to any of our EPPs in North Carolina. But regardless, set that aside. If an EPP is in revocation status, does that mean all programs are in revocation status, like elementary education, special education, versus kindergarten?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is maybe. It depends on how and where the sanction falls. So if remember, we're looking at the overall performance measures as well as subgroups of performance measures, and to the extent that we can disaggregate to an individual program area, we can and should. That said, it is very hard to do. So if there is a way that we can look at a large program, like let's say again, I'll use UNC Charlotte because they have a huge program. If they have enough numbers that we can look at specific programs, then we can disaggregate to the individual programs. But in most cases, that's difficult to do because the sample sizes get so small so quickly. So if the only way we are able to look at a program is overall, then it would be the overall program that would be impacted by that sanction.
Very good. Thank you so much for clarity around all of these questions. So board members, this item is coming to you for approval at the end of our meeting today, and you see the recommendation in the exact wording of that recommendation in your material. And thank you, Dr. Seibert.
You're welcome.
And that concludes my one item on ES&P. Chair Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now proceed to the Business Operations Committee, and I'll call on our Vice Chair, Mr. Duncan, Chair of that committee.
Good morning, everyone. This is Alan Duncan, along with Todd Chastain. We head the Business Operations Committee, and we have one action on first reading item today. It involves the approval of a contract over $1 million, and I believe Tamika Dunn is here to tell us about this, and I'm going to call on her in just a moment. This is a contract that would be for in excess of $1 million, and it's focused on set-aside funds from the federal IDA Special Education Preschool Grant. I've received, Tamika or whoever else may be here to help with these questions, I have received from board members a couple of questions this morning. And so as you give a quick review of the contract, if you could, to the extent you're able, address these questions. One of them is whether DPI is using the set-aside that it can take here to provide services to low-performing schools. The second one is, what are the requirements for an LEA in order to receive this funding. So if you're able to address those as you give the board a brief description of the contracted issue here, that would be much appreciated.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I am here just to talk briefly and provide as much information as possible concerning this amendment. From what you all can see, this is a contract that started back in 2013 and continues yearly through the Office of Early Learning for the Early Learning Network, which is based at UNC Chapel Hill at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute. This particular amendment is to extend for years 7, 8, and 9, and it is a project that is funded with the Individuals and Disabilities Education Act. So over the next 3 years, they are planning to provide additional support to the North Carolina Exceptional Children's Program coordinators and directors. They are also planning to train extensively over the next couple of years and come up with some form of certification system as well to develop and disseminate evidence and research-based materials. They're also going to contribute development to the state level guidance documents, processes, and training materials. So all of that will be updated. The preschool pyramid model will also ensure the early childhood social emotional learning through program-wide implementation is also done. And also we will report required data on the preschool pyramid model project for the Exceptional Children Division. And of course, collaborate more with the agencies to maximize resources. So over the next 3 years, they're looking to spend just over $4 million. A great portion of that will be to pay personnel. They currently have about 20 people employed right now. It will also include trainings, certifications, coachings, and also preschool orientations in the transition period and going from pre-K to kindergarten. As far as the two top things that Mr. Duncan talked about, low performing schools and the requirements, that information was not provided to me, but I will be glad to look into it and get it to you as soon as possible.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Is there, Tamika, if you would be kind enough to just make sure the information is distributed to all board members when you're able to find that information, or get other people to help you put together responses to those questions.
Okay.
I think everyone would be interested.
Okay.
Are there other questions or comments on this item? Not hearing any, that would conclude our report. I think the questions are important, but I don't think there are questions that that the responses would necessarily affect our approval of this contract. It's more an ongoing, I think, informational pursuit to assure that we're following. My sense of it is to assure that we're following the board's strategic goal for equity and make sure that these services are being provided to low-performing schools, students who are in need of these services, and that we also take a careful eye in terms of making sure the requirements to get these services are met by the LEAs who are receiving the main parts of the funding or the benefits of funding in this contract. So with that, Chairman Davis, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. We have one final item of business, which is under my chairman's report, and it's specifically related to the board's North Carolina Education Fund. Last September, we agreed to allow the board's North Carolina Education Fund to be used for the FAST NC Hurricane Florence recovery efforts. The bipartisan FAST NC Steering Committee, led by Dr. Mike Ward, concluded the established application rounds and distribution of funds based on the requests received from districts and schools across the state. As a member of the FAST NC Steering Committee, I'm seeking the board's permission to use the North Carolina Education Fund following the established FAST NC process to respond to the disaster relief as a result of Hurricane Dorian. A comprehensive disaster response update will be provided to the entire board at its regularly scheduled October 2019 meeting. Any questions on this request? Hearing none, board members will now vote on any items requiring action from the committee and chairman report. Thorough discussion and report was provided on each item. At this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any items from our action on first reading agendas, and if there is no request to remove any item, I ask for a motion to approve ESNP 1, BISOP 1, and the FAST NC Steering Committee request. Is there a motion to approve those items?
So moved, Reggie Keenan.
Motion by Mr. Keenan. Is there a second?
Olivia Oxendine offers a second.
Second by Dr. Oxendine. Any discussion on these three items before we vote? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll after the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Motion carries. Board members and other participants, thank you for your time today. There's no other business before the board for this meeting today. I now request a motion to adjourn the September 19, 2019 called meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, JB.
Motion by Mr. Buxton, second.
Ms. White?
Second by Ms. White. Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain, did I hear you on the call?
Yes.
Gotcha. Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
And motion carries. Thank you again. We stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Reggie Keenan.